Thank you very much. We are going to be joined by two of our project leads who are going to organize their talk around the principles of community relations and their work with community engagement, which is an important pillar of what we do at CNA, and in many ways, one of the really important end results. Heather Perez will proceed first, and we're going to set aside roughly 25 minutes for presentation, and feel free to put questions in the chat, and Heather will be followed by Ben Carlton, who will also lead another section of about 20 to 25 minutes for which we will take questions. Heather?
Thank you, Scott. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Maybe good morning to some of you. Not sure what time zone everyone is in. My name is Heather Perez, and I am an advisor at CNA. I oversee the Crime Analyst in Residence program, a brand new BJA funded, where we're working on putting embedded analysts in small and rural police departments. I also serve as project director for Project Safe Neighborhoods through my involvement on being on the faculty of Michigan State University through a sub-award with CNA. So I have worked on Project Safe Neighborhoods since the beginning, which has been really great to work nationwide. So a little bit more about Project Safe Neighborhoods in just a moment. But I do want to say thank you for joining our Building Community Engagement through TTA collaboration. If we can go to the next slide, I would appreciate it. Thanks. So meet our speakers. Hildy Zizo will be introducing herself in just a moment. I've been fortunate to work with Hildy over the last few years of developing resources for Project Safe Neighborhoods. We'll also hear from Bill Taylor. Bill and I serve together as the analyst and liaison for the Pacific region for Project Safe Neighborhoods. And the two of them have had much involvement over the years with community engagement. So Hildy, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Thank you, Heather. So I'm a principal advisor here at JRI, and I've been with JRI a long time in several different capacities, but I am a criminologist. I have multiple decades of experience, as Scott and Nancy just admitted for themselves, but too many to actually give a number for. But I really focus in on a lot of issues that we'll be discussing in this session today: community engagement, violence prevention, and something that Nancy mentioned as a priority, which is inclusive research, which I have been involved in that kind of research for many, many years and view it as a priority myself. So that was very encouraging to hear from her.
Awesome. Thank you, Hildy. And I think that Bill is having a little difficulty getting on. So let's go ahead and move forward since our time is tight. And when he does join us, we'll let him do a quick introduction and then chime in on the conversation. So Hildy, if you actually, could we move to the next slide, please? Awesome. Thank you. So just to kind of inform everyone what we're going to be talking about, we'll get to what we mean in terms of community engagement in just a moment. I just want to give you a quick overview of the two Department of Justice funded programs that we will be talking about in terms of community engagement as an aspect in both of those. So Project Safe Neighborhoods is a nationwide initiative that brings together federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement officials, prosecutors, community-based partners, and other stakeholders to identify the most pressing violent crime problems in the community and develop comprehensive solutions to address them. So Project Safe Neighborhoods has been funded by the Department of Justice since 2001. It has been very fun and interesting to see the priority shift in Project Safe Neighborhoods So as you see now, the 4 key design elements, community engagement is first and foremost in Project Safe Neighborhoods. And then prevention, intervention, focused and strategic strategy enforcement, and then accountability. And so we have developed the Project Safe Neighborhoods Blueprint for Success that I've included the link for you so you can read further about what Project Safe Neighborhoods is and what has happened over the years with this project. Next slide, please. And so the other program that we'll be talking about is the National Public Safety Partnership, so PSP, again, funded by Department of Justice, to provide an innovative framework to enhance federal support of state, local, and tribal enforcement and prosecution authorities for enhancing public safety. PSP was originally the Violence Reduction Network, which began in 2014. It was to promote interagency coordination by leveraging specialized law enforcement expertise with dedicated prosecutorial resources to promote public and community safety. Again, here, community engagement is one of the primary core areas, along with community constitutional policing, crime analysis, criminal justice collaboration, federal partnerships, gun violence reduction, investigations, and technology enhancement. So next slide, please. All right, so we are asking a question. Hildy, can you kind of give us from your perspective, since you've been involved with many initiatives, why do you think that we're now emphasizing community engagement in Department of Justice violent crime reduction programs?
Okay, well, I think it's important to take a bit of a historical perspective to really understand that question. Community engagement is certainly not a new concept in policing, but we are at a pivotal point in policing history. I think there's 2 things that seem to be happening at once. If you look at the research and the experience in the field, we do understand how important building trust and developing positive community relationships are, particularly when police are working in high violence neighborhoods. But events over the last decade, as we know, from Michael Brown in Ferguson to George Floyd in Minneapolis and too many other similar events involving police shootings and deaths in custody of unarmed Black men, those have really brought us to one of the lowest moments in police community relations. And in fact, data from the Pew Research Center really tells the story. When people were asked if they had confidence in the police to act in the public's best interest, the variation in responses to that question was really stark. While 32% of white adults said yes, they had confidence, a great deal of confidence in the police, only 18% of Hispanic adults said yes, 16% of Asian adults said yes, and just 10% of Black adults had confidence in the police. So I think this data leaves little doubt about the importance of building those positive relationships, particularly in those high violence neighborhoods, because it's these areas that are mostly comprised of people of color. So if people want better cooperation, if the police want better cooperation from victims and witnesses, if they want people to have faith that they can actually solve crime, and if they want legitimacy and trust from the people they're serving, then they really have to put collaboration with the community at the heart of their work. And so what does that actually mean? What does collaboration engagement mean in practical terms, you know, in the field, when police are in neighborhoods? Well, I've interviewed both community members and police officers for many years and in numerous jurisdictions around the country. And when I ask people, how should officers engage with community members? The number 1 trait mentioned, and it's pretty consistent, is with empathy. Police showing empathy during interactions with the public. Also, people tend to say, officers just need to listen, be active listeners, and show community members that they care by having those honest and transparent conversations. That's really what is meant when we use those terms, authentic engagement and authentic relationships. So we also know that police alone can't solve violence, certainly not in the long run. Without witnesses or people who are in the know talking to police, clearance rates get really low. To be successful, police need partnership and trust from the community. And to solve big community problems like those that are most persistent and consistent in violent crime hotspots, police need community partners from all of government, from social and behavioral services, or from credible messengers in the community, who can all work together and focus in on those highest risk places and really do transformational work with people and to transform lives. So it's these community collaborations that work along with the police that create that long-term change, not just some short-term responses. So I would say this is why community engagement is really critical to 21st century policing. And it's why programs like PSN and PSP that you just described have really added community engagement as a key component, and why the officials from those programs are really talking about how necessary community engagement is for violence reduction in particular.
Awesome. Thank you, Hildy. And Bill has joined us. So welcome to the conversation, Bill. If you just want to do a quick introduction and then kind of give us your perspective on why you think that we're now emphasizing community engagement in Department of Justice violent crime reduction programs, that would be great.
Great, thank you so much. So Bill Taylor, I work in both the PSP and the PSN program. Currently, I'm assigned to the Shreveport PSP program. I also am the Pacific liaison for the PSN. So I have two roles. In addition to that, my background is 37 years in law enforcement with the city of Lowell, Massachusetts. The last 5, I was the police chief there. And in that capacity, I was able to really embrace the key core components of the 21st century task force report on policing. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of my accomplishments while I was at the police department. And so what I would say, to echo many of the comments that Hildy made, I think the key component is, for many years, there was a missing component to community violence reduction efforts. And I think there was a recognition that the key component that was missing, one of the key components, was the community engagement component. And for many of the comments that Hildy already made, I would certainly echo and second that without, the integral trust, that relationship, trusting relationship between the police and the community, then the police cannot be effective in their efforts to reduce violent crime and make their communities safer. So I think it's a welcome addition over the last couple of years that community engagement is one of the core components of violence reduction. And I think the communities that we've seen that embrace that and really bring the community in as an equal partner to those efforts, I think, are the ones that are going to be successful as we move forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. So I offer this not as a negative statement, and Scott Decker and anyone else who's been involved in PSN. So originally, community engagement through PSN essentially meant a media campaign. So it was more like informing the community rather than engaging them. So there have been some serious strides in what that means to be collaborative with the community. So happy to see those efforts being made. Next slide, please. So to summarize, as Bill and Hildy offered, effective community engagement is vital to 21st century policing. It builds that authentic and positive relationship with communities being served, establishes legitimacy and improves trust with marginalized communities, and supports the collaboration and partnerships necessary for comprehensive responses to community problems. Next slide, please. All right, poll questions. And so this is for our audience. What have you worked on? Actually, let's have the speakers address this part of it. What have you worked on, assisted with development of, or are aware of resources for those wanting to enhance community engagement? Bill and Hildy?
Well, I'll mention a few things, and then I think I'll turn it over to Bill to go into more detail about the one we've done most recently. But I've been fortunate to be involved in some really interesting work in this whole area of community engagement, and I like to focus on even the next, what I view a higher level engagement, which is collaboration work. And, you know, collaboration between police and community really denotes a much more equal relationship where both are entitled to equal amounts of information, decision-making resources, and sort of have a symbiotic relationship. And so this work started back in 2016, really after the events in Ferguson and another kind of low point in police community relations. CNA had funding from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we held 3 workshops in different regions of the country to examine the challenges and also the successes of police community collaboration, which is that higher level than engagement. And both police and community members attended those workshops, and together they presented some really interesting efforts that were taking place on the ground in a number of communities around the country, really bringing police and community together, many through funding from programs like the Smart Policing Initiative, Burn Criminal Justice Innovation Program, and the COPS Office. And as a result of that work, or those workshops, CNA developed a framework of 7 key principles that agencies can use to guide them toward greater collaboration and more effective community engagement. So actually, if you could go to the next slide, it might be 2 more slides. And next one, this one. So this really lays out the 7 collaboration principles that are truly important and critical for collaborative work between police and communities. That strong leadership it takes in an organization, the orientation towards service, the transforming training and building community relationships, and very specific engagement with diverse communities, improving communication and messaging, and understanding community perspectives. These principles are aligned with the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, but really aligned with the way what we heard from both police and community in those workshops. So that was a really important effort, and it's become the basis of a lot of other work we're doing in this area. So we took those principles and really made them the foundation of a new effort that really started with PSN and PSP. And I was kind of asked several months back or last year, you know, how could we bring this area of community engagement more alive to help police agencies that are involved in both PSP and PSN understand where they need to improve in this whole area and do a better job of community engagement. So we at CNA designed a community assessment, or an assessment process that was typically used to look at, well, how do you improve investigations in police departments? How do you improve crime analysis functions in police departments? And we took that process and we designed an assessment for community engagement. So we could help agencies understand where their strengths were, where their gaps were, and to understand how they could really improve and become a collaborative agency with the community. So, and we use these 7 collaboration principles as the foundation of that assessment work. So that's a lot of the work I've been involved in, and let me turn it over to Bill to talk more specifically about this assessment process and where we're at with it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So when we went, if you go to the next slide, I think, we talk a little bit about what's important for strategies to reduce violence, and clearly, a community engagement component is extremely important, especially as we discuss some of the recent events over the past couple of years with the events that have happened across the country that are very noteworthy, that have caused a fracture between the police and the community that they are there to protect. And so I think there have been several high-profile incidents in custody deaths, police use of force, and certainly COVID was a big component that also drove a wedge between the police and the community. Our hope and our goal in this assessment project is to assess where a community is, identify gaps and areas for improvement, and then make recommendations for them to increase their community engagement opportunities moving forward. And all of that is being done based on some ideas that we have come across from our work across the country with many different agencies, and certainly research and best practices in general. I'll give you a couple of examples that I think communities have really done a great job. One area is in police advisory councils. So for example, Baton Rouge, Tulsa, and also Shreveport, communities that I've had the privilege to work with, have all embraced a community advisory council. Some of them are more in the formative stages than others, but Baton Rouge, for example, in Louisiana, is very advanced. And the engagement with the community, it really gives the community some input at a foundational level into the operation and the governance of their police agency. And so in Baton Rouge, for example, one of the areas that they decided to focus on was the selection of the community members into this advisory council. So they decided to go out to a third-party nonprofit to do it, which seems to have worked very well. And some communities around the country are replicating that model. So that's kind of some ideas. Also, an area that we've seen, for example, Shreveport has a very extensive National Night Out that they actually do in October, not in August, like many other communities. But it's the size and scope of it is tremendous, and they get tremendous community support on that. So those are some examples of some outreach efforts and community engagement opportunities that we've seen.
Awesome, thank you both. I think we're going to do a poll question now for our audience, and then we'll go to having the two of you speak about your most recent involvement with the community engagement capacity assessment. All right, so our poll question is up. Are you actively participating in a community engagement grant-related partnership? Yes or no? And if you are, what is your role in that? And then if you are directly doing that work through a grant, please let us know which grant that is. Oh, awesome. Okay, so half the audience, yes, actively engaged. Looks like large presence by research partners and other category. And definitely involvement in PSN and PSP. So this is great. This is a good conversation for this audience then. If we can go to the slide, please, of the example site for Rochester, New York, that would be great.
I think that's back 2 slides.
There we go.
There you go.
So Bill and Hildy recently were able, this is a pilot, and Bill and Hildy were able to kick this off under PSN and PSP. So I will let them share their experience.
Well, I'll just go over the assessment a little bit. So Rochester put up its hand. It's very important that an agency, a police department, actually put up its hand and say, we would like a community engagement assessment. So then they're open to what we're asking for in the way of information, and as well as the recommendations we'll be making. So Rochester, the Rochester Police Department put up its hand. It's both a PSN and PSP site. And So we decided to make that our pilot site for this community engagement assessment. And so we're going to complete that pilot effort before we move on to other departments. But there are a number of other police departments that are anxious to have this assessment. So that's really, really encouraging. You know, our goal is to really look at, and we ask a lot of questions and ask for information about the department's current community engagement practices and policies. And we identify the strengths, gaps, and opportunities and areas for improvement. And we provide a whole set of recommendations, but that's after we actually send subject matter experts to the site to really talk with police officers and community members from marginalized neighborhoods. So we get a lot of input and feedback, and we make those recommendations. And then the programs PSN and PSP can provide TTA to help implement our recommendations. So that's the overall effort. And Bill, you have anything to add about some of how we do our work?
No, I think you covered it. The only thing I would say at the very last bulleted point, to identify potential TTA training and technical assistance opportunities. During our recommendations, we try and identify either PSP or PSN TTA, and very much they kind of complement each other. But we try and identify specific TTAs to recommend to a site that would really fill in those gaps or work with the host agency and the community to try and, to fill in those gaps and address positively those recommendations. One such example, just one, could be a messaging campaign or a social media messaging campaign, and how that can be used more effectively, to reach out to the community. I think, for example, in that particular example, we would recommend that it's a two-way communication street, so that the community and the agency can converse back and forth. So that's one minor example of some of the TTA that we could recommend.
Awesome, thank you. And if we'll go to the last slide, I know we are at our time, but we just want to make everyone aware that we have included in the PowerPoint presentation some TTA resources. So Project Safe Neighborhoods, PSP, Community Violence Intervention and Prevention, the White House led effort that really, I think, has started the conversation around other projects really needing to focus on community engagement. Tremendous amount of resources there. The COPS office also has been focusing on this for years. And then, as Hildy mentioned, the CNA collaboration principle. So please click on those links. You will probably be amazed, impressed what we have to offer. So thank you very much for your perspective, Hildy and Bill. I greatly appreciate working with both of you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Lots of information, which is make us having these links even more valuable. And so these will be available if you don't have them by coming back and looking through the slides once they're posted and made available. We're going to pivot now and hear from another group that's also done work with community relations. And Tammy Felix is going to lead this discussion and include a variety of other staff at CNA and projects that they've been involved in as well. Tammy, can I pass it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Tammy Felix. I'm a senior research scientist with JRI, and I had the good fortune to serve as the project director for the homicide support group work for the COPS office. I'm joined today by my JRI colleagues, Associate Research Analysts Carrie Richardson and Ben Carlton. They both served as lead analysts on the project, along with our partners from the Charlotte, Mecklenburg, North Carolina Police Department and District Attorney's Office. So we also have with us District Attorney for Mecklenburg County, Spencer Merriweather, and Chardell Rose, who is formerly with the Victim Services Unit at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, but she has since brought her many talents to the Baltimore Police Department, where she is now serving as their Victim Services Manager. So we're very excited to have them with us today to talk about the Homicide Support Group work. But I would be remiss if I did not mention another key member of our project team, Chief Rodney Monroe. He really pioneered the Homicide Support Group concept during his time with the Richmond and Charlotte Police Departments. Chief Monroe is unfortunately unable to join the panel today, but we wanted to thank him for his work in championing this approach to community service and empowerment. So in 2019, CNA received a grant from the COPS office to collaborate with both Charlotte and Richmond, Virginia Police Departments to develop a field-friendly resource providing law enforcement agencies with guidance on how to implement homicide support groups in their jurisdiction. Homicide support groups, for those of you that aren't familiar, offer a programmatic structure for agencies to provide much needed support to secondary crime victims, improving their cooperation in the investigatory and prosecutorial processes. They also help to increase clearance rates, community cooperation, and improve community safety. This work that again was sponsored by the COPS office culminated in the development of an interactive program implementation toolkit, which we'll go over later in this presentation. And it provides agencies with the foundational knowledge that they need to implement a successful homicide support group program. So before we get started, we have a couple of poll questions that we would like to ask our audience to complete. So if you could take a moment when they pop up to review the questions. So our first question here is, have you heard of a homicide support group before? So if you could just take the next, 28 seconds or so to let us know if you've heard of this concept or are familiar. Okay, so the overwhelming majority have heard of the concept before, so that is very good to hear. This presentation will fall on open ears. And we have one additional poll question before we get started. I feel like we need a drum roll here for the results. Okay, so for the 44% of you that disagree, you are in the right place. As we move into our panel discussion, you can hear directly from our collaborators in Charlotte about all of the great benefits of homicide support group programs. So let's dive in. Chardell, you are up first. The homicide support group has potential benefits for both secondary victims and the police department. One being improved police-community relations. How has the operation of Charlotte's homicide support group impacted relationships with the community?
Yes, thank you, Tammy. So the homicide support group has had a significant impact on relationship buildings within the community. As we all know, homicides, they're tragic, they're unfortunate, and they're just senseless acts. And so they not only affect the families, but they also affect the community as a whole. And so a lot of the members of the homicide support group, they oftentimes become allies for the police department. And so they encourage the community to help prevent these crimes, as well as enhance the safety and just the quality of the neighborhoods in which they live in. A lot of the members also at the homicide support groups, they've lost a loved one already. And so they know what that feels like, and they don't want anyone else to go through that or to walk in those shoes. And so anytime we would see new members.
Chardell, you may need to turn your video off because I think it might be interfering with the audio.
This group. We knew that lives were taken. So turn. Can you hear me, Tammy?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's better.
Okay. How about, do you want me to start over, or could you hear?
You cut off about halfway through your great response.
Okay. Oh, I hate that. So just to recap on what I was saying, these homicide support groups have definitely had a significant impact on the community. I was saying that a lot of these members become allies for the police department, and they like encourage the community to help prevent these crimes, as well as enhance the safety and quality in which the neighborhoods that they live in. Members of the group, they also, they are the ones that at firsthand lost someone, and they don't want anyone else to go through what they have gone through. And so you could ask anyone that attended that group. We never wanted to see new members because we knew that a life was taken. Members of the homicide support group, they also help with building that trust and legitimacy in the community. They all have stories to tell, and within their stories, they have the opportunity to speak on the relationships that they've built, not only with sworn members in the police department, but the non-sworn members as well. And this oftentimes can help bridge that gap within the community. And so I can give an example. When I was in Charlotte as a victim support specialist, we would respond to homicide scenes. And on one of the scenes that I went on, I had a mom that did refuse to speak to me. She didn't want nothing to do with the police, even though we didn't dress like police officers. She still was like, CMPD, I want no parts. And so we would call out volunteers to those scenes as well. And so that volunteer was a member of that neighborhood. And so she was able to connect with that mom, speak with that mom, and let her know that she was in her same shoes a few years ago and losing her son. And then she was able to connect me with her and let that mom know that she could trust me, that I was there to help her through this time. And so I've seen firsthand how the members of this group has helped build and strengthen the relationships within the police department, as well as the community, and also given officers the community's perspective as well.
Thank you, Chardell. That was fantastic. And, just to point out that is one of the kind of key concepts with the homicide support group, is providing that on-scene support when these unfortunate incidents happen. So thank you for highlighting that. District Attorney Merriweather, which I will now refer to you as Spencer because that is a mouthful. So as the DA for Mecklenburg County, you're one of Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department's primary partners for, basically, I just want you to describe for us why the homicide support group is important to your office and how it has impacted your office's relationship, both with the police department and with the community.
Yeah, I should first start by saying that as an elected district attorney, it wasn't my first interaction with the homicide support group. That started when I was a line prosecutor assigned to our homicide unit. It was there that I, as opposed to simply interacting with families, an individual family that lost a loved one, I was hearing representatives from a number of families, all of whom introduced themselves in the meeting by giving the name of the person that they lost and the date that they lost. So the impact that has on me or any other prosecutor, it takes it out of the four corners of the courtroom. It takes it and makes it, once again, human. It takes it out of the law books. That is a level of engagement that deepens the trust and relationship between the prosecutor and the family that they will be working with in the course of a very long journey through our criminal justice system. That is a first initial significant value of homicide support group. That most times when families walk into a courtroom, the deck is stacked because they are wildly unfamiliar with what the laws of that courtroom are, who the actors are, and that can be extremely uncomfortable. Usually their case is one of a number of cases that are going to be handled in some of those first criminal appearances. And so the amount of time that they have to look across from the prosecutor and see that someone who is faithfully engaged in work on behalf of lifting the voice of their loved one is limited. So walking into the room with those families, however, at a homicide support group, it's a different room because those families own. They are the ones who, in many ways, quite frankly, holding prosecutors accountable, holding investigators accountable. It allows us to answer questions about process. It's important to have ground rules, and we do have those. That we're not really going to get into the nitty-gritty of individual case facts, but even having different families hear common responses about how cases flow through our court system, how decisions are made in the district attorney's office. It builds trust that people are hearing the same thing. It's like, well, they did tell me. They might not be the person to ask the question, but they did tell me. As far as our relationship with law enforcement, that's deepened as well, because we get a chance to see the questions that are asked of them at an early stage of the investigation. And that those questions are just as probing as the ones the prosecutors get. So all in all, you see just the true soup to nuts intersection of all the different touch points within the justice system and the investigation, and the real impact on victims throughout. And you never lose sight of it. That continues to be value added for my office and all the prosecutors who interact with our office.
Thank you for that response. Is it fair to, oh, I think I'm getting feedback here. Is it safe to say that the the homicide support group has helped to increase transparency and, to an extent, accountability, right, between all three entities, the DA, department, and community?
Without a doubt. And people often understand, the challenges that we wear in the assessment of cases, the challenges that we wear in the trial of cases. Now those families are getting even more of a front row seat, understanding about the decisions that we make. We are getting a deeper understanding of the frustrations, particularly, certainly true through COVID, worse with COVID, as we've all experienced a significant case backlog, that we understand those frustrations and then can voice those very frustrations to judicial officials in court, because we are hearing them directly in a comfortable setting from people at that homicide support. It adds amplification to the voice of victims' families because of what we hear. So that enhances our work, holds us accountable, and enhances the work of prosecutors.
Thank you. Chardell, another one for you. There are other jurisdictions that operate homicide support groups, but from our knowledge, they tend to leverage external kind of victim service providers to provide these services. Could you talk a little bit about why it's so important that homicide support groups be administered by the police department itself?
Yes, ma'am. So I think, any agency can host a homicide support group. However, I do believe that housing them in the police department, as I stated before, it just helps continue to bridge that gap between the community members and the police department. And so as we know, when a loved one is murdered, that brings on just a tsunami of emotions. And oftentimes one of those emotions is anger. And then some of that is actually geared towards the police department, whether it's if a family, they don't understand the investigative process, they don't agree with what the detectives have found, and just the different evidence in the different processes. I feel as if when it's housed in the police department, we're able to kind of help with those emotions and just helping families kind of understand that criminal justice process as a whole. Actually, within Baltimore, we don't have a homicide support group, and so they do have where police can come in and we speak on behalf of the department. But in Charlotte, I've seen the true benefits of housing it within the police department. And one of the key significance there is it was actually held in the chief of police's conference room. And so that just showed Charlotte's unwavering support throughout the multiple chiefs that, we've had since the group started in 2009, that the support comes from the top down. They really support the homicide support group, and it just shows the overall compassion for these families, especially with dealing with this unfortunate loss. And with people that in the culture of policing today, some people are just anti-police. And so we had one family that came to the group. She actually had a phone case on her phone, which had derogatory language towards the police department. We didn't say anything to her. She's entitled to, her thoughts and her feelings, but she continued to come to the group. And it just completely changed her outlook on the police. and I'll go into how the group is run later on in the conversation, but you'll hear how it's housed in the police department, but also the officers and detectives, they're involved within the group. So it's not just there for formalities, it's there because they actually want to show that empathetic side to the group.
Yeah, and thank you, Chardell. That was actually my next question. Was I was going to ask you, you've already discussed how, one of the key components is this, kind of on-site, meeting people right in their moment of need, and then housing it, having these meetings take place within the chief's department just to show the commitment of the department. So the next kind of key concept here is those monthly support meetings where you bring folks in to kind of share their experiences and share updates on the cases and things. Could you tell us a little bit about what happens during these monthly meetings for homicide support groups and how you engage with the families outside of the meetings?
Yes, absolutely. So in preparation for the support groups, we would mail postcards as well as send emails to families inviting them to the group. We did not require any type of registration. It was open to anyone at any time who has lost a loved one to a homicide. So even if the homicide didn't occur in Charlotte, but you lived in Charlotte, you could still attend the support group. Once we got their information, we would add them to the mailing list as well. And the meetings were always held the first Tuesday of the month at 6:30. We would provide water, coffee, and light refreshments during this meeting. So we would open the meeting up with just a welcome to everyone, and we would kind of go over the ground rules and group rules. We would then go into a question and answer session for the families to be able to ask questions to homicide detectives as well as a member from the district attorney's office. We would ask that they not ask case specific questions, but that rarely happened because, they want to know about their case. And so the cool thing about it would be the detectives would tell them they would speak to them right after and kind of get their name, their information, and take them, out in the hallway to kind of let them know they would follow up with them. So families really appreciate it and like that. And as well as Spencer's office, when they're there, if they had questions about case specific, then they would do the same, talk to them in the hallway. And then once that question and answer session was over, we would dismiss the detectives and the DA and just give new members the opportunity to share their stories if they would like. We would let people know that you can come and say absolutely nothing. There's no pressure to speak. If you didn't even want to say your name, you didn't have to. We were just pleased that they took that first initial step, and the hardest part is just coming. We would normally pick a grief topic just to discuss with the group, and we would provide them with handouts in which they could take home. So for example, around like the holidays, we would talk about just how to cope during the holidays and different things like that. I can say that it was truly a heartwarming experience to watch these families every month just growing through their grief. And everyone grieves differently, but just having to go through and find their new normal in life. It was really an experience to see. We would definitely call it a family that no one wanted to be a part of. And as you see, the picture that's shown on the screen is of one of the groups. Sizes would vary. Sometimes there'd be very few people. Sometimes the room be packed where we're trying to bring in other chairs. So it just depends. But I know families, they look forward to this group every month. And we would tell them, there's no timeline on your grief. And so there was no timeline on how often you could attend the group. We had members since the inception of the group in 2009 that were literally still coming to this group. It helps them heal. It helps new families see that, wow, they experienced this back in 2009 and they are still here. They're still standing. They're still surviving. So it also instills that hope as well. And then out of the support group, just engaging these families outside of there, the volunteer piece is a huge program. So it allows people when they're further along in their journey, I believe 2 years, you had to have 2 years in, you could take the volunteer training. And so that's kind of how we engage them outside of the group. Also, we hold several different events throughout the year in which families could honor their loved ones, some being like Crime Victims' Rights Week events, definitely the National Day of Remembrance for Murder Victims, which is always September 25th. And then we would also host a memorial tree lighting in December.
Thank you, Chardell. I mean, I know I had the opportunity to meet one of the participants, and it was just, I know she was a longtime member of the group, which unfortunately she had to be a member, but it's just such a testament to the work you all did in Charlotte, just the participation you have and just the dedication that even the participants then feel toward the group. So thank you for sharing that. Spencer, what role has the homicide support group played in the prosecution of cases?
90% of life is showing up. And when you are showing up, again, at an early stage of family grief, they know that you are there. You can see you in the context of everything else that's going on with their case. If the only time that people who lost a loved one are seeing prosecutors in court, if the only time that they are seeing us is in preparation for those court dates, we are losing. We're not serving the community sufficiently. So finding those opportunities outside of a court setting, outside of their court preparation, is extremely important to build trust. There have been times when, because of the relationships and because of the presence that we've established in the homicide support group, that meant that a family member was more likely to pick up the phone and call us when there was additional things that we needed to know about a case. Now, often we're referring them back to the investigators to be able to follow up. If there was something that we were able to hear, that there is a real value added by that family feeling enough confidence in our office because we were present to pick up the phone and call us. That furthers prosecution. Certainly, the more committed that you can have families into what's going on in the justice system, the stronger prosecution you have, the more likely you are to be successful in an outcome. So it goes without saying, adds not only to is a benefit to the families, but certainly benefit to my office. In that way, I've been
Great, thank you. Okay. So in closing, and thank you, Ben and Carrie, there are a number of components that contribute to the success of homicide support groups. What have proven to be some of the most important lessons learned regarding the operation of both Charlotte's and Richmond's homicide support groups?
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. So yeah, I had the opportunity to observe Charlotte's homicide support group in practice and meet with participants as well as those who facilitate the meetings. And there are a number of lessons that we detail in our case studies, but I want to just highlight a few. So one important lesson we learned through conducting the case studies is that leadership buy-in and support are critical to the successful implementation and operation of the homicide support group. So having the leadership support of the chief really helped to provide legitimacy for the homicide support group, and it gave the detectives a lead to follow as well, and also allowed for the cultural transformation necessary to fully embed the homicide support group and victim services into the policing ethos of CMPD. And one other lesson learned that I would highlight is that partners, the department and partners really must consider the personal qualities of those who are going to staff the homicide support group. Chardell was facilitating the meeting I attended, and I could really just tell how strong of a rapport she had built with the families, how strong of working relationships she had with sworn personnel, which is just absolutely essential for an effective homicide support group. So I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I actually had the opportunity to sit in on the homicide support group in Richmond, meet with some of their key players there. And a couple of key things that they learned there was having a full-time family liaison officer. So this was first a person that would connect the families with supportive services and also would be responsible for coordinating the meetings, the homicide support group meetings. So they felt that that was very important to allow them to strengthen their relationships with the community with this continued ongoing engagement. Another key lesson learned was how they needed to take some time to understand that it takes time to engage and connect with families. So Richmond didn't have a ton of interest at first. They didn't have a lot of interest from families. And they were able to learn that it takes time for people to want to engage, and that everybody responds to these traumatic instances really differently. So some people might want to engage right away. Some people, it might take them longer. And some people might want to engage at different stages of the grieving process. And other people might want to engage at different stages of the investigation or judicial process. So they found that it was important for them as a department to be patient and understanding of this. And as they were building up their homicide support group and trying to gain interest, they started holding a number of events in the community. And they found that doing this not only allowed them to help build community engagement with these ongoing connections, but it also allowed them to understand some of the services that were important, some of the resources that were needed, and that was helpful to them as they were standing up the homicide support group as well.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And now, without much further ado, we do want to provide some time to quickly go through the toolkit that we put together and give everyone a brief kind of tutorial of how this toolkit operates and the benefits of it. So Carrie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yes, yeah, let's get into the toolkit. So as Tammy mentioned before, the toolkit is a comprehensive tool. It's supposed to be a field resource that helps law enforcement agencies to navigate how to implement effective homicide support groups in their jurisdiction. So we'll quickly go through some of the key functions here. So this first page tells you about the homicide support group. It talks about what they are and provides purpose of the toolkit. Talks about some of the benefits and the importance of community engagement for law enforcement agencies. So whenever you click to this click here button, it'll take you to the next slide. And the next slide gives you some pointers and identifies some of the key navigation functions that you'll want to be aware of as you're navigating the resource. So you'll click to continue and you'll get to our homepage. So our resource, a toolkit, is organized with 5 core concepts that are the most essential for an agency implementing and sustaining a homicide support group. So it covers the benefits, how to establish a homicide support group, some of the key partners and roles, how to facilitate a meeting, and how to sustain and measure success. So we're not going to go through all of these, but we'll highlight a couple of the key points. So we'll start with the benefits of homicide support group. This lists like a couple of subtopics or sub-core areas. And they're these supportive topics that are supportive to the key concepts that were identified earlier that provide some additional information. So first we'll check out some improvements to the homicide improvements to annual homicide rates. So here you'll see some information from the case study sites that we worked with, and it displays some of the reductions that they saw in homicides. And then if you click to continue, there's also some information about their clearance rates and showing some of the improvements that they've observed there. So you can also click to go back to some of, this will take you back to the toolkit. So if we want to explore another area, we can look at establishing the homicide support group. Again, it will take you through some of the core topics, subtopics that are supportive to establishing a homicide support group. So first, we'll look at establishing and creating key stakeholder roles and responsibilities. So here, it'll show some of the key stakeholders that a department should consider engaging with as they're implementing a homicide support group, as well as some of the primary roles that they may play as part of the homicide support group. So this information might be useful to a new agency that is new to the idea of homicide support groups and might not know where to start. Some information to reference. So we can go back to that core topic. And then we can also look at implementing effective training. So here we highlight some of the important considerations for agencies as they're implementing a homicide support group and thinking about what type of training they want to deliver. There's also a couple of key resources here. There's a resource highlight from a volunteer training manual, and there's also the OVC Victim Assistance Training Program. So if you were to click directly on that, it would take you directly to a web page for the online training program. And you can learn how to access that training if you would like directly from that web page. You can click on some of the navigation here to go back to establishing a homicide support group and going back to the toolkit homepage. And we'll lastly just touch on one more facilitating a homicide support group. So this section talks about some of the key areas for consideration when you're facilitating a homicide support group. It touches on everything from the facilitators to other meeting logistics. So for an example, we'll look at meetings and materials. Here you'll find a couple of different resources. Some of these include resources that you can share with your participants and some of the members of the homicide support group that they might find helpful. An example of this is how to manage grief. And there's also a resource here about a sample agenda. So again, for those that might be not familiar with homicide support groups or not know where to start with their first meeting, this sample agenda could be a useful tool for them and understand maybe what topics or points you want to touch on during those meetings. Okay, and then the bottom navigation just takes you back to the homepage. But that really is it as far as the demonstration for the toolkit. I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at the toolkit because there are a lot of valuable resources and materials and other valuable information on there. But yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Tammy.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Carrie. And just quickly, I know we're running out of time and we want to get to questions, but I just want to take a quick minute to thank District Attorney Merriweather and Chardell for not only participating today, which I know takes time out of your very busy days and all the good works that you're doing, but also just all the support and help you gave us throughout the project. We really appreciate it. You guys were so open and it allowed us to really put all this material together with these. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. Back to you, Scott.
This looks very much like the partnerships and community engagement that NIJ Director Levine spoke about in the preceding session. I wonder, Carrie and Ben, were you ever questioned for your credentials as outsiders?
I can say that I wasn't questioned. I found the environment very welcoming and supportive, and you know, the homicide support group meetings are kind of built on this foundation of understanding and compassion and acceptance. So everyone was very eager to participate and share and engage with others.
Yeah, and I would echo that, Scott. I would say, you know, the folks, especially in Charlotte, were really, you know, they wanted to share how this homicide support group was benefiting, you know, their families, how it was benefiting the community. So they were actually glad to have us in there. You know, I would say the families were, as well as representatives from the police department and district's attorney's office. Everybody was very willing to, you know, to speak with us, really, because they wanted to highlight sort of this novel approach to showing empathy and compassion to families.
And are you aware of other jurisdictions that have implemented either this model or something akin to it?
Yeah, there are a handful of others, Scott. I think Louisville, Boston, but I don't think that any of the programs have quite the strong relationship that particularly Charlotte and Richmond have with their, you know, criminal justice counterparts.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at is whether this looks like it's a program that can be implemented, or if it's a series of, you know, if a member of my family were a victim of crime, I would want Mr. Merriweather to be my DA, given the grasp of the community and experience and tone. And so I'm trying to dig at whether this is a model that we could look at other jurisdictions to implement, or if this is just idiosyncratic, it's the right people at the right time in the right city. But it sounds like it's a little bit of both. And we have a question in the chat room from Luther. How can data be used to demonstrate to police departments the benefits of community engagement? There was not much in the way of police resistance, as I recall your description of this project. What advice would there be for cities where the police may not be interested in engaging with the community?
Chardell, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can touch on it a little bit. Can you guys hear me, or should I turn my camera off? Okay, so yes, Scott, so how you could say, if you take down my information and reach out to me in about a year, I can let you know if it is the program, or if it is, like you said, the right people in the right place, because I'm going to try to implement this in Baltimore. And so I can answer that question for you in the future. I do think it is a program that can be implemented throughout agencies. I do think you need the right people in the right places. However, I think that it is a model that you can carry forward in other agencies. As far as the data being used to demonstrate benefits of community engagement, that's not necessarily my realm of expertise. So someone else may want to take that question as far as the police and the community engagement piece.
Yeah, Scott, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to go over was that, we weren't able to collect the data through this project, but we set up and developed some evaluation tools that can be implemented in other departments.
Great. And I see my new colleague, Ken Novak, down at the bottom of the screen, who lives and works in Kansas City, where there's a mothers group that's been quite active, mothers who've suffered the loss of a child or a family member to violence in the street. What about cities that already have some form of structure? Would this toolkit be useful, or would it be redundant? I know you'd need to know more about the local community.
I don't think that it would be redundant.
Go ahead.
I just overspoke somebody. Chardell, were
Okay.
you?
I would just a brief. I don't think it would be redundant. So, for example, currently in Baltimore, there is a community agency that holds this group. And so what they'll do is they'll just have a portion where you bring in, I think anyone can host the group. I just think one of the key elements is including the police department. Like, don't exclude them out of it, no matter where the group is. Even if people don't want to hear from them, I think it just helps clear up some of the understanding on like the investigative process and different things that people, when they're dealing with trauma, they don't understand. And so I think that as long as, no matter where the group is held, as long as you include someone, the police department, the prosecutor's office, so that they can be able to explain some of the things that get misconstrued when you're going through the traumatic loss of a murder.
Ken, you were going to make a point?
Yeah, Scott, just simply, just because you had mentioned it, my experience has been this type of thing at a very grassroots level, and the justice system is either not involved or minimally involved. So I think that this is novel in this approach, and I can see many benefits from using a toolkit in this regard to bring those parties together.
Great. This, like many of the other sessions, has really been productive and quite informative. And I think we've got some marketing to do of this project that unfortunately there's a home for in too many communities around the country.